Scarlett Hayes stared in horror at the suitcase contents. 17 identical $3,000 Armani suits, a solid gold toilet seat, because apparently that's a thing, and a leather-bound journal filled with what looked like deranged poetry about claiming his mate under the moonlight, written in Comic Sans font. "What the hell?" she whispered, sitting cross-legged on her studio apartment floor, surrounded by enough designer menswear to fund a small country. The black leather suitcase, identical to her own cheap knockoff, gaped open like Pandora's box, if Pandora had really expensive taste and questionable interior design choices. The job interview at Morrison & Associates had been a disaster. She'd spilled coffee on the senior partner's white shirt, accidentally called him Mr. Moron instead of Mr. Morrison. And when asked about her biggest weakness, she'd somehow launched into a 5-minute rant about how pineapple on pizza was a crime against humanity. Walking out of that glass tower, she'd felt like a complete failure. Now this. Her fingers trembled as she lifted one of the suits. The fabric felt like liquid silk, probably worth more than her rent for 3 months. Beneath the suits, neatly arranged in foam compartments, were stacks and stacks of cash. Not just any cash, crisp hundreds, bound with rubber bands like something out of a mob movie. Scarlett's heart hammered against her ribs as she did quick math. $2 million, give or take. Her barista salary suddenly felt like pocket change. "Oh God," she breathed, scrambling backward from the suitcase like it might bite her. "This is money laundering. Or drug money. Or worse." Her mind raced through every crime drama she'd ever binge-watched. "I'm going to end up in cement shoes. Do people still do cement shoes?" She grabbed the leather journal, hoping it might contain some clue about the suitcase's owner. The first page made her jaw drop. Her laugh is like the tinkling of silver bells mixed with the chaos of a hurricane. Today she wore that purple sweater that makes her eyes look like storm clouds, and I wanted to howl at the very sight of her graceful neck. "Jesus," Scarlett muttered, flipping pages. Each entry was worse than the last, a bizarre combination of flowery romance novel prose and what sounded like barely contained animal instincts. The handwriting was surprisingly elegant for someone who used Comic Sans as their font of choice. "The wolf in me recognizes her as mine, though she remains blissfully unaware of my supernatural nature. Perhaps I should reveal myself during the full moon, allow her to see my true form as I claim her under the starlit sky." "Okay, so mystery suitcase owner is either a very committed LARPer or completely unhinged," she said to her empty apartment. "Fantastic." Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate. "Rent's due in 2 days. Please tell me the interview went well." Scarlett stared at the money. $2 million could solve every problem she'd ever had. She could pay rent, buy the coffee shop where she worked before it went under, maybe even go back to school. All she had to do was steal it. "No," she said firmly, snapping the journal shut. No. I'm not a thief. Even if the money probably belonged to some criminal who wouldn't exactly call the cops." She pulled out her phone to call the airline's lost luggage department, then hesitated. What if this really was dirty money? What if calling attention to it got her killed by some crime boss who collected people's kneecaps as a hobby? A knock at her door made her jump so hard she knocked over her coffee mug. "Scarlett," her landlord's voice drifted through the thin wood. "We need to talk about the rent." "Just a minute, Mr. Peterson." She frantically started shoving suits back into the suitcase, her hands shaking. The journal slipped, falling open to a page that made her freeze. "Scarlett Hayes, barista at Corner Grind Coffee, apartment 4B at 1247 Maple Street. She takes her coffee with 2 sugars and a dash of cinnamon, and she hums while she works. Today I bought 17 coffees just to watch her smile." Her blood turned to ice. This psycho knew where she lived. Knew her name, her work schedule, probably her shoe size too. And he'd been watching her, buying coffee just to stalk her? The knocking grew more insistent. "Scarlett, I know you're in there." With superhuman speed born of pure panic, she crammed everything back into the suitcase and shoved it under her bed. She'd figure out what to do later. Right now, she had to convince Mr. Peterson she wasn't about to become a homeless person. She opened the door, trying to look casual instead of like someone who'd just discovered she was being stalked by a potentially supernatural millionaire with questionable poetry skills. "Mr. Peterson." "Hi. I was just." "The rent, Scarlett. It's 3 days late." "Right, yes, about that." She glanced back toward her bedroom, where $2 million in cash sat under her bed like a tempting, illegal safety net. "I had a job interview today. Big law firm. I should know something soon. Mr. Peterson, A man who looked like he'd been born wearing a cardigan and disappointment sighed. "I like you, kid, I really do. But I can't keep letting this slide. Pay up by Friday or you're out." As soon as he left, Scarlett deadbolt the door and leaned against it, her mind spinning. Somewhere out there was a man who knew everything about her, had been watching her for who knew how long, and apparently thought stalking was romantic enough to document in Comic Sans font. And he probably really, really wanted his money back. Her phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. She stared at it, heart pounding. 3 rings. 4. She answered. "Hello." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Ms. Hayes." The voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. It sounded like expensive whiskey and dark chocolate. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Scarlett's knees gave out, and she slid down the door to sit on the floor. I don't know what you're talking about." A low chuckle rumbled through the phone, raising goosebumps along her arms. "My suitcase. Black leather, combination lock, contains several items I'm rather attached to. Look, if this is about money laundering or whatever illegal thing you're involved in, I don't want any part of it. I'll give you your suitcase back, no questions asked." Silence stretched between them for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost amused. "Money laundering? Miss Hayes, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should meet to discuss this properly." "Meet?" Scarlett's voice cracked. "With the person who's been stalking me and writing creepy poetry about claiming me under moonlight? I don't think so." Another pause. Then, to her complete bewilderment, he laughed, a rich, genuine sound that shouldn't have been as appealing as it was. "You read my journal. It wasn't a question. And you think I'm stalking you. Aren't you?" "Miss Hayes, Scarlett. May I call you Scarlett?" He didn't wait for an answer. "I can explain everything. The journal, the money, even why I know your coffee preferences. But not over the phone. Why should I trust you?" "Because," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "If I meant you harm, do you really think I would have written such terrible poetry about it first?" Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the fact that she was probably talking to a criminal, Scarlett found herself fighting back a laugh. "It really was terrible. Comic Sans? Seriously? My assistant's idea. She thought it would make me seem less intimidating." "Your assistant helped you write stalker poetry?" "It's not stalker poetry," he said, sounding genuinely offended. "It's undelivered love letters." Scarlett blinked. "What? Look, I know how this appears. But I'm not a criminal, I'm not dangerous, and I'm certainly not stalking you. I'm just very bad at normal human interaction." "Normal human interaction," she repeated slowly. "As opposed to abnormal human interaction? Or non-human interaction?" The silence stretched so long she wondered if he'd hung up. "Ms. Hayes," he said finally, "are you free for coffee tomorrow? Somewhere public, your choice. You can bring friends if it makes you feel safer. I just need my suitcase back, and I think you deserve an explanation." Scarlett looked toward her bedroom, where enough money to solve all her problems sat hidden under her bed, belonging to a man who wrote terrible poetry and bought 17 coffees just to see her smile. "Corner grind," she heard herself saying. 10 a.m. And I'm bringing my pepper spray." "I wouldn't expect anything less," he said warmly. "Until tomorrow, Scarlett." The line went dead, leaving her staring at her phone in the quiet of her apartment, wondering what the hell she'd just agreed to. Under her bed, $2 million waited patiently while somewhere across the city, a man who might not be entirely human planned what he hoped would be the most important coffee date of his very long life. Chapter 2. Scarlett arrived at Corner Grind an hour early, armed with pepper spray, her phone on speed dial to 911, and the leather journal tucked in her purse like evidence in a murder trial. She'd barely slept, alternating between reading more of those ridiculous love letters and Googling how to tell if you're being stalked by a millionaire werewolf. The internet had been disappointingly unhelpful. "You look like hell," observed Marcus, her co-worker and the closest thing she had to a best friend. He was manning the espresso machine with his usual dramatic flair, complete with unnecessary wrist flourishes that made simple latte art look like performance theater. "Thanks. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear before meeting her potential stalker," Scarlett muttered, tying her apron with shaking fingers. She'd debated calling in sick, but rent was due in 2 days, and she couldn't afford to lose hours, even if she was about to be murdered by a poetry-writing psychopath. "You're what now?" Marcus paused mid-flourish, foam art forgotten. "Long story. Just, if a really well-dressed man comes in here asking for me, and I suddenly disappear, call the cops." "Honey, half our customers are well-dressed men asking for you." You're going to have to be more specific. Before Scarlett could explain, the bell above the door chimed, and her heart stopped. The man who walked in looked like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine. If Forbes featured devastatingly handsome men who wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd just run his fingers through it, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Everything about him screamed money, power, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to check your bank balance before buying coffee. He paused in the doorway, scanning the small cafe with an intensity that made Scarlett's skin prickle. When his gaze found hers, something electric shot through the air between them. Part recognition, part something much more dangerous. "Well, damn," Marcus whispered beside her. "If that's your stalker, I can see why you're conflicted." Damien Blackthorne, because it had to be him, approached the counter with the fluid grace of someone who owned every room he entered. Up close, he was even more unsettling. There was something not quite human in the way he moved, like he was holding himself back from something wilder. "Good morning," he said, and that voice from the phone call washed over her like expensive whiskey. "I'd like to order coffee." Scarlett blinked. "Just coffee?" "Several coffees, actually." His lips twitched in what might have been amusement. 17, to be precise. Marcus made a choking sound beside her. 17? Scarlett's voice cracked. Are you having a party?" "Something like that." Damien's eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made her want to either run away or lean closer. 17 lattes, if you don't mind. However you normally make them." "However I normally." Scarlett trailed off as understanding dawned. "Oh my God. You're him. You're the guy who orders 17 coffees just to watch me work." Damien had the grace to look embarrassed. "I can explain." "Holy shit," Marcus breathed, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "You're Damien Blackthorne. I saw you on the cover of Forbes last month. Most eligible bachelor or most eligible psychopath." He squinted at Damien critically. "The article never did decide which one you were." Scarlett's blood ran cold. She'd recognized him too, now that Marcus said it, that sharp jawline, those intense eyes. Damien Blackthorne, CEO of Blackthorne Industries, net worth somewhere in the billions. The article had been half admiring profile, half concerned investigation into his business practices. There'd been rumors about hostile takeovers, mysterious acquisitions, and employees who disappeared without notice. And he'd been stalking her. 17 lattes, she said mechanically, her hands moving on autopilot as her mind raced. "Coming right up." She started the espresso machine, using the familiar routine to steady her nerves. Beside her, Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement, clearly starstruck by their billionaire customer. But all Scarlett could think about was the suitcase under her bed and the increasingly disturbing implications of this entire situation. Why would a billionaire need $2 million in cash? Why was he watching her? And why, for the love of all that was holy, did he write poetry in Comic Sans? "So," she said as she steamed milk for the first latte, not looking at him. "Come here often?" "Every day for the past 6 months," Damien replied without hesitation, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, every day." Scarlett's hand slipped, and hot milk splashed over her fingers. "You've been watching me for 6 months?" "Not watching. Observing. There's a difference." "Is there?" She turned to face him, ignoring the sting of the burn. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like stalking." Damien's jaw tightened. "I'm not a stalker." "Right. You're just a billionaire who knows my work schedule, my address, and how I like my coffee, and you've been observing me for half a year while writing creepy poetry about claiming me under moonlight." She gestured with the milk steamer, sending a few drops flying. "That's totally normal behavior." Marcus was watching this exchange like it was his favorite soap opera, his eyes bouncing between them like he was at a tennis match. "The poetry isn't creepy," Damien said stiffly. "It's romantic. Her neck calls to my inner beast like siren song to a sailor." Scarlett pulled the journal from her purse and flipped it open. "I dream of running my hands through her hair while she submits to my dominance under the full moon." "That's your idea of romance." Damien's face went several shades of red. "You weren't supposed to read that. Then you shouldn't have left it in a suitcase full of mysterious cash." Her voice was rising, drawing curious looks from the other customers. She lowered it to a hiss. "Speaking of which, want to explain why you have $2 million just lying around? Because that seems like the kind of money people have when they're involved in very illegal things." "It's not." Damien stopped, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. Uncomplicate it." I can't. Scarlett stared at him for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. Then I'm calling the FBI. Wait. Damien's hand shot out, covering hers on the phone. The contact sent an electric shock up her arm that had nothing to do with static electricity. Please, just give me a chance to explain. You have 5 minutes, she said, pulling her hand away and trying to ignore the way her skin tingled where he'd touched her. Start talking. Damien looked around the crowded cafe, then back at her. Not here. Too many people. Oh, I'm not going anywhere private with you. You can explain right here, or I can explain to the nice FBI agents why I have your suitcase. Fine. Damien straightened his shoulders like he was preparing for battle. But you're not going to believe me. Try me. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then opened it again. The money it's for my pack. Your pack. Scarlett blinked. Like a wolf pack. Something like that. Marcus made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snort. Dude, are you seriously trying to tell her you're a werewolf? Because that's either the best pickup line I've ever heard or the worst. Damien shot him a look that would have frozen lava. It's not a pickup line. Right, Scarlett said slowly. So you're telling me you're actually a werewolf, and the $2 million is, what pack dues? Emergency fund. For cleanup situations. Cleanup situations. When pack members get overzealous during full moons, sometimes there's property damage. Or, he paused, looking uncomfortable. Bodies. The cafe went very quiet around them. Even the espresso machine seemed to pause in its hissing. Bodies, Scarlett repeated faintly. Not human bodies, Damien said quickly. Animal bodies. Deer mostly. Sometimes rabbits. The pack has a tendency to hunt when they transform, and we have to dispose of the remains before someone calls the park service. Marcus leaned forward, completely invested now. This is better than cable. So you're telling me, Scarlett said carefully, that you're a werewolf CEO who carries around $2 million in cash to clean up after your pack's hunting trips. Yes. And you've been stalking me because... Damien's jaw worked silently for a moment. Because you're my mate. The silence that followed was deafening. Somewhere in the back of the cafe, a customer coughed. Your mate, Scarlett said. Yes. Like forever mate? Till death do us part mate. More like, till the end of time mate. And you determined this how? Damien's face went red again. Your scent. It's... He gestured helplessly. Coffee beans and chaos. It's perfect. Oh my God. Scarlett buried her face in her hands. This is actually happening. I'm being wooed by a werewolf billionaire who thinks I smell like chaos. You do talk to your plants, Damien said helpfully. Every morning, you tell your fern about your day. Yesterday you told it that your landlord smells like mothballs and disappointment. Scarlett's head snapped up. How do you know that? I may have enhanced hearing. Enhanced hearing. She looked at Marcus, who was grinning like Christmas morning. He has enhanced hearing. Which is how I know you sing off-key in the shower, you have nightmares about student loans, and you practice acceptance speeches for awards you'll never win in your bathroom mirror, Damien continued, apparently deciding that honesty was the best policy. Oh, that's not creepy at all, Scarlett said weakly. I also know you take your coffee with 2 sugars and a dash of cinnamon, you hum while you work, usually something from the Hamilton soundtrack, and you have a tendency to reorganize the sugar packets when you're nervous. Damien's voice grew softer. You bite your lip when you're concentrating, you laugh at your own jokes, and you give free coffee to anyone who looks like they're having a bad day. Despite herself, Scarlett felt something flutter in her chest. That's actually kind of sweet. In a completely terrifying way. I'm not trying to terrify you, Damien said earnestly. I'm trying to court you. By stalking me and writing terrible poetry? The poetry was supposed to be romantic. In Comic Sans, my assistant thought it would make me seem less intimidating. Your assistant was wrong. Marcus cleared his throat loudly. Guys? You're kind of having a lover's quarrel in the middle of my workplace, and there's a line forming. Scarlett looked around and realized that half the cafe was now openly staring at them, phones out and recording. Great. She was probably going to end up on social media as barista gets stalked by werewolf billionaire. You won't believe what happens next. This is insane, she muttered, turning back to the espresso machine. Absolutely insane. But you believe me, Damien said, and there was something almost vulnerable in his voice. Scarlett paused, her hand on the steam wand. Did she believe him? The logical part of her brain was screaming that this was all elaborate nonsense, that billionaires didn't turn into wolves and stalk baristas they thought were their destined mates. But the cash was real. The journal was real. And there was something about the way he moved, the way he looked at her, the way he seemed to know things he shouldn't know that made the impossible seem almost possible. I don't know what I believe, she said finally. But I know that whatever this is, it's not normal. Normal is overrated, Damien said softly. Says the man with $2 million in supernatural cleanup money. That's not technically what it's for. Scarlett turned to stare at him. What? Damien looked supremely uncomfortable. The money. I may have been embezzling from the PAC fund. Embezzling? To buy this coffee shop. The world seemed to tilt sideways. What? Corner Grind was going bankrupt. You were going to lose your job. So I acquired it. Anonymously. Through several shell companies. Marcus dropped his coffee mug. It hit the floor with a crash that echoed through the suddenly silent cafe. You bought my workplace, Scarlett said slowly. To save your job. You bought my workplace to save my job. Yes. Using money you stole from your Werewolf PAC's dead body disposal fund. When you put it like that, it sounds bad. Scarlett stared at him for a long, long moment. Then she started to laugh. It started as a giggle, then built to a full belly laugh that had her doubled over, tears streaming down her face. You, she gasped between laughs, are the most ridiculous man I have ever met. Damien looked uncertain. Is that good? You stole money from werewolves to buy me a coffee shop because you think I'm your mate based on how I smell, and you've been courting me with stalking and terrible poetry written in Comic Sans font. Yes. And now you need the money back before your PAC realizes you've been embezzling from their emergency fund. That would be ideal, yes. Scarlett wiped her eyes, still chuckling. This is the weirdest Tuesday of my entire life. So you'll give me the suitcase back? She looked at him, this impossible, ridiculous, probably supernatural man who'd turned her life upside down in less than 24 hours. On one condition. Damien tensed. What condition? Scarlett pulled the journal from her purse and waved it in the air. You let me read these aloud at the next PAC meeting. The color drained from Damien's face. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious. Either you let me publicly humiliate you with your own terrible romantic poetry, or I'm calling the FBI and telling them about your little embezzlement scheme. That's blackmail. That's negotiation. Damien stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed. A rich, genuine sound that did things to her insides that she definitely didn't want to examine too closely. You know what? He said, his eyes sparkling with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. I think I'm going to like being mated to you. Don't get ahead of yourself, wolf boy, Scarlett said, but she was smiling despite herself. We haven't even finished your 17 lattes yet. As if on cue, the espresso machine let out a loud hiss, reminding her that she had a job to do. A job that, apparently, her potential supernatural mate had bought to keep her employed. This was definitely the weirdest Tuesday of her entire life. And she was starting to think that might not be such a bad thing. Chapter 3. Scarlett stood in the marble lobby of Blackthorn Tower, clutching the leather journal like a weapon of mass destruction. The building soared 40 stories above Manhattan, all glass and steel, and the kind of intimidating architecture designed to make ordinary people feel insignificant. Which, unfortunately, was working. But she'd come too far to chicken out now. Excuse me, she said to the receptionist, a perfectly manicured blonde who looked like she'd been carved from expensive porcelain. I need to see Damien Blackthorn. The woman, her nameplate read Chloe, barely glanced up from her computer. Do you have an appointment? No, but I have something that belongs to him. Scarlett held up the journal. And I'm not leaving until I get some answers. Chloe's eyes flicked over Scarlett's coffee shop uniform and discount store jeans with barely concealed disdain. I'm afraid Mr. Blackthorn doesn't see anyone without an appointment. Perhaps you could leave a message. Fine, Scarlett said, opening the journal to a random page. I'll just wait right here. She cleared her throat and began reading in a voice loud enough to carry across the bustling lobby. Your eyes sparkle like the finest imported mineral water, bubbling with effervescence that makes my wolf soul sing. Oh my God, Chloe breathed, her perfect composure cracking. And when you laugh, it's like a symphony of tiny silver bells being played by angels who have never known the touch of mortal sorrow. Several people in expensive suits had stopped to stare. A few were pulling out phones. Miss, please, Chloe started, but Scarlett was just getting warmed up. I dream of the day when I can reveal my true nature to you, when I can show you the beast that lurks beneath this corporate facade. Security, Chloe hissed into her headset. We have a situation in the lobby. For you are the moon to my wolf, the caffeine to my bloodstream, the chaos to my carefully ordered existence. What the hell is going on down there? Scarlett looked up to see Damien Blackthorne himself striding out of the elevator, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. He was wearing another one of those ridiculously expensive suits, this one charcoal gray, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it all morning. "Oh, good," Scarlett said cheerfully, snapping the journal shut. "I was wondering when you'd show up." The lobby had gone completely silent. Everyone, security guards, executives, delivery people, was staring at the tableau of the city's most eligible bachelor being confronted by a coffee shop barista with what was obviously a very personal journal. "Scarlett," Damien said carefully, his voice pitched low. "What are you doing here?" "Getting answers." She waved the journal again. "We had a deal, remember? I give you back your suitcase. You explain why you've been embezzling from your werewolf pack to buy me a coffee shop. But first, I thought your employees should know what kind of man they work for." She opened the journal again, and Damien moved so fast he was practically a blur, covering the distance between them in 3 impossibly quick strides. "Don't," he said, his hand covering hers on the book. "Please." "Then start talking." Damien looked around at the sea of fascinated faces surrounding them. "Not here. My office." "I don't think so. You've already proven you can't be trusted alone." "Ms. Hayes," came a crisp British accent from behind them. "Perhaps I can help." Scarlett turned to see an impeccably dressed woman with silver hair and sharp eyes approaching them. She moved with the kind of confidence that suggested she could run a small country before lunch and still have time for a manicure. "Victoria Sterling, Mr. Blackthorne's executive assistant," the woman said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I believe I can schedule you in for his 3 p.m. emotional crisis slot. It's right between the quarterly projections meeting and the stockholder conference call." "His what now?" Scarlett blinked. 3 p.m. emotional crisis. Victoria repeated matter-of-factly, already tapping something into her tablet. "Mr. Blackthorne schedules one every few months. Usually involves someone crying, occasionally some light property damage. I've learned to block out extra time for cleanup." Damien looked like he wanted the marble floor to swallow him whole. "Victoria, that's not. Shall I have maintenance preposition some tissues in your office, sir? And perhaps remove any throwable objects?" "Nobody is throwing anything," Damien said through gritted teeth. "Famous last words," Scarlett muttered, but she was fighting back a smile. There was something she liked about Victoria Sterling. "Excellent," Victoria said briskly. "Miss Hayes, if you'll follow me, I'll escort you to the executive floor. And perhaps you could refrain from reading aloud from whatever that is until you're in a more private setting. The last thing we need is for this to end up on social media." "Too late for that," said a voice from the crowd. Someone held up their phone, camera still recording. "This is already going viral. Hashtag barista versus billionaire is trending." Damien closed his eyes as if in pain. Perfect. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was conducted in tense silence, broken only by Victoria's occasional murmured phone calls arranging damage control. Scarlett found herself studying Damien in the mirrored walls. The rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching at his sides, the muscle jumping in his jaw. "You know," she said as they reached the top floor, "if you'd just been honest from the beginning, we could have avoided all this drama." "Honest about what?" Damien asked as Victoria led them down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. "That I'm a werewolf? That I've been watching you for months? That I embezzled money from my pack to buy you a coffee shop because the thought of you losing your job made my chest feel like it was caving in." Scarlett stumbled slightly. "Well, yes. Right. Because that's the kind of thing that goes over well in normal human relationships." "Who says I'm normal?" Damien stopped walking and stared at her. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" "Most people are." Scarlett looked at him, really looked at him. Underneath all that expensive tailoring and corporate polish, there was something wild and dangerous lurking just beneath the surface. Something that probably should have terrified her. Instead, it just made her more curious. "Most people don't have your terrible poetry as blackmail material," she said. Victoria cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in your office, sir? Your 2:30 is arriving shortly." As if summoned by her words, the elevator dinged, and a group of people emerged who made Scarlett's skin prickle with unease. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in expensive business attire, but there was something off about them. They moved too quietly, their eyes too sharp, scanning the hallway like predators looking for threats. "Alpha," said the tallest of the men, a silver-haired giant who looked like he could bench press a small car. We're here for the monthly review. Beta Marcus, Damien replied, his entire demeanor shifting. Gone was the nervous, poetry-writing stalker. In his place was someone who radiated authority and barely leashed power. You're early. Traffic was light, Beta Marcus replied, his pale eyes flicking to Scarlet with unmistakable curiosity. Who's the human? That's, Damien started, but Scarlet cut him off. Scarlet Hayes, she said, extending her hand with a bright smile. Damien's anger management therapist. The silence that followed was so complete that Scarlet could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents. His what? Asked one of the women, a redhead with cheekbones that could cut glass. Anger management therapist, Scarlet repeated cheerfully, shooting Damien a look that clearly said, play along or I start reading poetry again. Damien's been having some emotional regulation issues lately. Beta Marcus looked between Scarlet and Damien with growing alarm. Alpha, is this true? Damien's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then, apparently deciding that this was somehow less embarrassing than the alternative, he nodded curtly. Miss Hayes has been helping me work through some recent stress. Stress, repeated the redhead flatly. Work-related anxiety, Scarlet added helpfully. Difficulty expressing emotions in healthy ways. Some concerning obsessive behaviors. Obsessive behaviors? Beta Marcus's voice had risen to something approaching a squeak. Oh yes, Scarlet continued, warming to her theme. Stalking primarily. And some very concerning poetry writing. All classic signs of emotional dysregulation in high-stress corporate environments. Victoria made a sound that might have been a cough, or might have been a barely suppressed laugh. Our Alpha, said the second man slowly, is seeing a human therapist. For stalking, added the other woman. And poetry, the redhead finished faintly. It's actually quite common among supernatural, high-achieving individuals, Scarlet said smoothly. The pressure to maintain a perfect facade often leads to unhealthy coping mechanisms. Scarlet, Damien said quietly, you're making this worse. Am I? She opened the journal again. Because I could always go back to my original plan. Let's see. Your lips are like rose petals kissed by morning dew, and I dream of the day when I can taste their sweetness while you surrender to my wolfish desires. Conference room, Damien barked, his face crimson. Now, all of you. As the pack filed past them into what Scarlet assumed was Damien's office, she heard one of them whisper to another. I knew something was wrong when he stopped attending the monthly hunts. And he's been wearing cologne, whispered back the redhead. Cologne, Marcus. Our Alpha is trying to smell like a human. This is a disaster, muttered the third man. What if the other packs find out? We'll be a laughingstock. Victoria appeared at Scarlet's elbow. Perhaps, she said quietly. You'd like to wait in the outer office while they conduct their meeting? Actually, Scarlet said, looking at the closed door of Damien's office. I think I'd like to hear this. She pressed her ear to the door, and Victoria, after a moment's hesitation, joined her. Completely unacceptable, Beta Marcus was saying. An Alpha doesn't need therapy. An Alpha needs to dominate. Perhaps the human is right, came Damien's voice, sounding tired. Perhaps I do have issues. Issues? The redhead sounded scandalized. Alpha, you're the strongest of us. You lead by strength, by instinct, not by discussing your feelings with some human. Her name is Scarlet, Damien said quietly. We don't care what her name is, Beta Marcus snapped. We care that you're compromising the integrity of the pack for some human female who clearly has you wrapped around her little finger. Scarlet bristled at that, but Victoria put a warning hand on her arm. You don't understand, Damien was saying. She's not just any human. She's... What? Your mate. The redhead's voice was dripping with disdain. Alpha, you're being ridiculous. Humans don't make suitable mates. They're weak, fragile, completely unsuited to pack life. She blackmailed me with my own poetry, Damien said, and there was something almost admiring in his voice. In my own lobby. In front of my entire staff. And you think this is a good thing? Beta Marcus sounded appalled. I think, Damien said slowly, that she's the first person in a very long time who isn't afraid of me. Of course she isn't afraid, the second man said. She doesn't know what you are. Actually, came Scarlet's voice as she pushed open the door, Victoria's restraining hand notwithstanding, I do know what he is. The entire pack spun to face her, and Scarlet got her first good look at them up close. They were all beautiful in that sharp, predatory way that seemed to be a supernatural thing, but their eyes were nothing human. They watched her with the focused intensity of apex predators, deciding whether she was prey or threat. And what exactly do you think he is? Beta Marcus asked, his voice dangerously soft. A werewolf, Scarlett said matter-of-factly. Who's been embezzling money from your emergency cleanup fund to buy me a coffee shop because he thinks I'm his destined mate, based primarily on how I smell. The silence stretched out until it became uncomfortable. Well, said the redhead finally. That's accurate. Also, Scarlett continued, holding up the journal, he writes really terrible romantic poetry about claiming me under the moonlight, and he's been stalking me for 6 months while working up the courage to actually talk to me. Beta Marcus turned to Damien with a look of profound disappointment. Alpha, please tell me she's lying. I can't do that, Damien said quietly. The poetry thing is particularly embarrassing, the second woman added helpfully. I mean Comic Sans? Really? That was Victoria's idea, Damien said defensively. It was not. Victoria called from the doorway. I suggested Times New Roman. You chose Comic Sans because you thought it would be less intimidating. Oh my God, Beta Marcus buried his face in his hands. Our Alpha has been compromised by a barista. Hey, Scarlett said indignantly. There's nothing wrong with being a barista. There is when you're supposed to be mated to the most powerful werewolf in the tri-state area. The redhead shot back. Most powerful? Scarlett looked at Damien with new interest. Really? Don't let it go to your head, Damien muttered. Too late. Scarlett grinned at him, and something hot and dangerous flared in his eyes in response. So what you're telling me is that I've managed to bring down the big bad Alpha with nothing but terrible customer service and a threat to read his diary aloud. That's exactly what she's telling you, Beta Marcus said grimly. The question is, what are we going to do about it? The pack turned to look at her with expressions ranging from resignation to calculation, and Scarlett suddenly realized that she might have gotten in over her head. But looking at Damien, seeing the way he was watching her with something that might have been pride mixed with terror, she decided that being in over her head might not be such a bad thing. Especially if it meant she got to keep that suitcase full of money. Well, she said brightly, settling into one of the leather chairs around Damien's conference table, I guess we'd better figure that out together. The pack exchanged glances that clearly said they thought their Alpha had lost his mind. Scarlett was starting to think they might be right. Chapter 4. The intervention was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp in Damien's private conference room, complete with PowerPoint presentations and what appeared to be a professionally printed agenda titled Operation Restore Alpha Dignity. Scarlett wasn't supposed to be there, but Victoria had conveniently forgotten to mention the meeting when she'd called to schedule Scarlett's follow-up therapy session for the exact same time. Now she sat in the corner, sipping coffee that probably cost more per cup than her hourly wage, watching 5 supernatural creatures attempt to stage an intervention for their lovesick Alpha. Point 1, Beta Marcus announced, clicking to the first slide which featured a photo of Damien looking brooding and mysterious on last year's Forbes cover. Pre-human Damien, apex predator, feared businessman, never seen in public without at least 3 supermodels. That's not even accurate, Damien protested from his seat at the head of the table. I haven't dated supermodels in years. Point 2, Marcus continued, ignoring him. Current Damien, writes poetry in Comic Sans, embezzles pack funds, allows himself to be blackmailed by a barista. She's sitting right here, Damien said through gritted teeth. Hi, Scarlett waved cheerfully. Don't mind me. This is better than reality TV. The redhead, who'd introduced herself as Lydia, shot Scarlett a withering look. This is exactly the problem. You're treating our pack's crisis like entertainment. Your pack's crisis is that your Alpha developed feelings, Scarlett replied. In the normal world, we call that being human. He's not human, snarled Jackson, the second man who'd been mostly quiet until now. He was younger than Marcus, with dark hair and the kind of pretty boy features that probably got him in trouble on a regular basis. That's the whole point. Could we focus, please? Marcus clicked to the next slide. Signs your Alpha has been compromised. The bullet points included excessive grooming, cologne usage, decreased pack hunting participation, and poetry composition. This is humiliating, Damien muttered. Not as humiliating as having the Riverside pack find out you've gone soft over a human, Lydia snapped. Do you know what happened to Alpha Stevens when his pack lost confidence in him? Enlighten me, Scarlett said, genuinely curious. Challenge duel, said the other woman, Elena, speaking up for the first time. She was smaller than Lydia, but had an intensity that made Scarlett think of a coiled spring. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and eternal shame. Eternal shame seems a bit dramatic, Scarlett observed. You don't understand pack dynamics, Jackson said dismissively. Alphas lead through strength and dominance, not by writing love letters to humans who don't even want them. Something dangerous flickered in Damien's eyes. What makes you think she doesn't want me? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I'm sorry, Scarlett said slowly. Are you all under the impression that I'm here against my will? Because I hate to break it to you, but I'm the one with the blackmail material. I'm the one who stormed his office building. I'm here because I choose to be. The pack exchanged glances that clearly said they hadn't considered this possibility. Besides, Scarlett continued, has it occurred to any of you that maybe Damien doesn't need to be fixed? Maybe he's just evolving. Alphas don't evolve, Marcus said firmly. They dominate. Well, that's a healthy attitude, Scarlett muttered. Jackson leaned forward, his pretty face set in determined lines. Which brings us to our solution. He clicked to a new slide titled Operation Jealousy Protocol. Damien sat up straighter. What protocol? Simple psychological manipulation, Jackson explained with obvious pride. We introduce competition for the human's attention. Nothing snaps an alpha out of obsession like territorial challenges. Once you realize you're not the only option, your natural predatory instincts will reassert themselves. You want to make him jealous, Scarlett said flatly. Exactly. I've already hired several actors to pose as your romantic interests. They'll show up at strategic moments, your workplace, your apartment building, that little cafe where you eat lunch on Wednesdays. Scarlett froze. How do you know where I eat lunch on Wednesdays? Jackson waved dismissively. Pack surveillance is very thorough. The point is, by the end of the week, Alpha Damien will remember that humans are conquests, not mates, and this whole embarrassing episode will be over. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Damien's coffee mug shattering in his grip. You've been watching her, he said, his voice eerily calm as coffee dripped from his hand. Of course we've been watching her, Jackson replied, apparently oblivious to the danger radiating from his alpha. She's a security risk. We had to assess the threat level. Threat level, Damien repeated. Minimal, Lydia added helpfully. Completely human, no supernatural contacts, works a minimum wage job, lives alone. Honestly, we can't figure out what you see in her. Scarlett bristled. I'm sitting right here. The surveillance was just practical, Elena said. Standard protocol for human entanglements. Human entanglements. Damien's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more terrifying than shouting would have been. Damien, Scarlett said carefully, recognizing the signs of an impending explosion. Maybe we should. You've been watching my mate. Each word was precisely enunciated, like he was fighting to keep control. She's not your mate, Jackson said impatiently. That's exactly the kind of thinking we're trying to fix. She's a human, a distraction. Once you see her with other men, you'll realize. Jackson didn't get to finish that sentence, because Damien had moved faster than human eyes could follow, slamming his beta against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. Nobody, Damien snarled, his eyes flashing with something definitely not human, watches my mate without my permission. Alpha, Marcus said carefully, you need to calm down. I am calm. Damien's voice was still that deadly whisper, even as he held Jackson 3 feet off the ground with one hand. I'm very, very calm. Damien. Scarlett stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Put him down. Damien's head turned toward her with predatory precision. They've been watching you. I gathered that. Put him down anyway. They think you're a threat. I am a threat. I have your journal, remember? Now put him down before you kill him. For a moment, Damien looked like he might argue. Then slowly he lowered Jackson to the floor. The younger man slumped against the wall, rubbing his throat. This, Marcus said grimly, is exactly what we were talking about. Uncontrolled emotional responses. Territorial behavior over a human. You're compromised, Alpha. I'm fine, Damien said, straightening his tie like he hadn't just nearly committed murder in a conference room. You're not fine, Lydia snapped. You just assaulted your own beta over a human you've known for 3 days. I've known her for 6 months. You've been stalking her for 6 months. There's a difference. Scarlett watched this exchange with growing unease. She thought the werewolf thing was weird, but manageable. Damien had seemed mostly harmless, awkward and romantic in a deeply creepy way, but not actually dangerous. This possessive, violence-prone version was something else entirely. You know what, she said, grabbing her purse. I think I'm going to go home now. No. Damien turned to her so quickly she stumbled backward. You can't leave. I'm sorry, what? If they're planning to send fake boyfriends after you, it's not safe. Damien, they're actors, not assassins. You don't understand. If I see another man touching you. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. I can't promise I'll be able to control myself. Well, that's not concerning at all, Scarlett said, edging toward the door. This is perfect, Jackson croaked from his position against the wall. The protocol is working already, and we haven't even started yet. What protocol? Damien's attention snapped back to his beta. The jealousy protocol. You're already responding to the mere suggestion of competition. Once we actually implement it, there will be no implementation, Damien said flatly. Alpha, you're not thinking clearly, Marcus said. This human has you so twisted around that you're threatening pack members. We have to do something. The only thing you have to do, Damien said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper again, is stay away from Scarlett. Or what? Lydia challenged. Damien smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Or I'll remind you why I'm the alpha. The pack fell silent, and Scarlett realized she was witnessing something primal and dangerous. These weren't just people playing dress-up as supernatural creatures. They were predators with all the violence that implied, and she was caught in the middle of their power struggle. I'm leaving, she said firmly, heading for the door. Don't follow me. Scarlett, wait. No. She turned back to face Damien. This is insane. You're insane. All of you are insane. She looked around the room at 5 faces that ranged from guilty to defiant. I don't care if you're werewolves or billionaires or whatever. Nobody gets to make decisions about my life without my input. We're trying to protect you, Damien said desperately. From what? Actors. From me. From what I might do if. If what? If I date someone else? If I don't choose you? Scarlett shook her head. Here's a revolutionary idea. How about you let me make my own choices, and if I don't choose you, you deal with it like a grown-up instead of threatening to murder people. She was halfway to the elevator when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hey, beautiful. Long time no see. Coffee later? Jake. Scarlett stared at the phone in confusion. She didn't know any Jake. Then it hit her. One of Jackson's actors was already in play. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a picture. And Scarlett's blood ran cold. Because she did know this Jake. Jake Morrison, her ex-boyfriend from college. The one who'd cheated on her with her roommate and then spent 6 months trying to win her back, with increasingly desperate gestures that had bordered on stalking. The one who'd found her in New York 2 years ago and shown up at her apartment drunk, demanding to know why she wouldn't give him another chance. The one who definitely, absolutely, was not supposed to know where she worked or how to contact her. Oh no, she whispered, staring at his smiling face on her phone screen. Oh no, no, no. Behind her, the elevator dinged and she heard Damien's voice. Scarlett, wait. She turned to see him striding toward her, his pack trailing behind, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. We need to talk, he said. About what? About how your beta hired my psycho ex-boyfriend as a fake actor to make you jealous. She held up her phone, showing him the picture. Damien went very, very still. Your ex-boyfriend? Jake Morrison. We dated in college. She swallowed hard. He's not stable, Damien. And he's not an actor your pack hired. He's here for real. The elevator doors opened, revealing Victoria Sterling with her usual unflappable expression. Sir, she said calmly, there's a Mr. Jake Morrison in the lobby asking for Ms. Hayes. He says he's here to take her to lunch. The temperature in the hallway plummeted. How did he know I was here? Scarlett whispered. GPS tracking on your phone, Jackson said weakly. We may have shared your location data with the agency that was supposed to provide the actors. Damien turned to look at his beta with an expression that promised swift and violent death. You, he said very quietly, gave a stalker access to my mate's location. He's not a stalker, Jackson protested. He's a hired actor playing a boyfriend. The agency vetted him. What agency? Scarlett demanded. Jackson suddenly looked very young and very scared. Craigslist? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Damien's growl, which was definitely not human. Sir, Victoria said helpfully, Mr. Morrison is becoming quite insistent. He says he won't leave until he speaks with Ms. Hayes. Perfect, Scarlett said faintly. My stalker ex-boyfriend thinks I'm dating a billionaire werewolf who's already demonstrated violent possessive tendencies, and we're all trapped in a building together. It's not that bad, Elena said hopefully. Oh really? Scarlett pulled up her phone, which was now buzzing constantly with increasingly frantic texts from Jake. Because he just texted that he knows I'm here with my rich boyfriend, and he's not leaving until he gets me back from that corporate asshole. Damien's eyes flashed gold. He called me a corporate asshole? That's your takeaway from this situation? Nobody insults my mate. I'm not your mate. You are, Damien said with absolute certainty. And now some unstable human thinks he can take you away from me. The elevators dinged again, and Jake Morrison stepped out like he owned the building. He looked exactly the same as he had in college. Sandy brown hair, average height, the kind of good looks that had made 19-year-old Scarlett think she was lucky to have him. Now she could see the calculating gleam in his eyes, the way he moved with predatory purpose that had nothing to do with supernatural abilities and everything to do with entitlement. "Scarlett, baby," he said, spreading his arms wide like he expected her to run into them. "Miss me?" Behind her, Damien made a sound that was definitely not human. This, Scarlett realized, was about to get very, very bad. Chapter 5. The confrontation with Jake in the Blackthorn Tower lobby had been mercifully brief. Mostly because Damien had looked like he was about 30 seconds away from committing homicide in front of a dozen witnesses and security cameras. Victoria had smoothly intervened, suggesting that perhaps Mr. Morrison should make an appointment like everyone else, and Jake had retreated with promises to catch up with Scarlett real soon. Which was how, 3 days later, Scarlett found herself sitting across from her psychotic ex-boyfriend at Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan, wondering how her life had gotten so completely derailed. "You look incredible," Jake was saying, reaching across the table to touch her hand. Scarlett pulled it away like he'd tried to brand her. "I've missed you so much, baby." "Don't call me baby," Scarlett said through gritted teeth. "And I still don't understand how you found me." Jake's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I never stopped looking for you, Scar. You're the one that got away." "I didn't get away. I left. There's a difference. Because of that misunderstanding with Melissa." "You mean when you slept with my roommate in my bed while I was at work?" "That was a mistake. I was drunk, she came on to me." "Jake!" Scarlett leaned back in her chair, studying his face. "Why are you really here?" His expression shifted, and for a moment she saw something calculating and cold underneath his practiced charm. "I got a very interesting phone call a few days ago. Someone offering me good money to take you on a date. Imagine my surprise when I realized it was my ex-girlfriend they wanted me to seduce." Scarlett's blood ran cold. "What?" $5,000 to take you to dinner and make you fall in love with me again," Jake continued conversationally, cutting into his salmon. "Best job I've ever been offered." "Someone paid you to date me?" "Well, technically they think they hired an actor to play your boyfriend and make some billionaire jealous. But when I saw it was you." Jake shrugged. "I figured this was fate giving us a second chance." Scarlett felt nauseous. "You're insane. I'm persistent. There's a difference." Jake's smile turned predatory. "Besides, you always did like the bad boys, didn't you? Why else would you be slumming with some corporate suit?" "Damien's not." Scarlett caught herself before she could finish that sentence. What was she going to say? That Damien wasn't a corporate suit. He was a werewolf who wrote terrible poetry and bought coffee shops to keep her employed? Not what? Not rich enough? Not dangerous enough? Jake leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Come on, Scar. We both know you're wasting your potential with this barista thing. I could take care of you. We could be good together again. We were never good together. We were explosive together. That's not the same thing." Jake's hand shot out, gripping her wrist before she could pull away. "One night. Give me one night to remind you what you're missing, and..." "Let go of her." Scarlett looked up to see Damien standing beside their table, and her heart did something complicated in her chest. He was wearing another one of his ridiculously expensive suits, but there was something different about him tonight. Something wilder just beneath the surface, like he was holding himself on a very tight leash. "And you are?" Jake asked, not releasing Scarlett's wrist. "Her boyfriend," Damien said, his voice eerily calm. "The one you're trying to replace." Jake laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Boyfriend? That's not what I heard. From what I understand, you two barely know each other." "Jake," Scarlett said urgently, recognizing the dangerous glint in Damien's eyes, "maybe you should." "Should what? Run away from some pretty boy in an expensive suit?" Jake stood up, finally releasing her wrist, and Scarlett was dismayed to realize he was almost as tall as Damien. "I don't think so." "This doesn't have to be a problem," Damien said, but Scarlett could hear the barely leashed violence in his voice. "Walk away and we'll pretend this never happened." "I'm not walking away from anything," Jake replied. especially not from Scarlet. See, I know her. I know what she likes, what she needs. What makes her scream. The temperature around their table dropped about 20 degrees. Okay, Scarlet said quickly, standing up and putting herself between them. That's enough. Both of you. Stay out of this, baby, Jake said, his eyes never leaving Damien's face. The grown-ups are talking. Damien moved so fast that Scarlet barely saw it. One moment he was standing calmly beside the table, the next Jake was stumbling backward, clutching his wrist. Don't, Damien said very quietly. Call her baby. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Every eye in the place focused on their little drama. Scarlet could see phones coming out, cameras starting to record. Damien, she said urgently, we need to leave. Now. Not without you, he replied, his eyes still locked on Jake. I'm coming with you. But we need to go before someone calls the police. For a moment, Damien looked like he might argue. Then he nodded curtly and turned toward the exit. Scarlet started to follow, but Jake grabbed her arm. This isn't over, Scar, he said softly, his grip tight enough to bruise. I meant what I said. I never stopped looking for you, and I'm not giving up now. Let me go, Jake. One night. That's all I'm asking for. One night to show you what you're missing. Damien spun around so fast he was practically a blur. She said let her go. Or what? Jake challenged, his grip tightening. What are you going to do about it, pretty boy? What happened next was a blur of motion that Scarlet's eyes couldn't quite follow. One moment Jake was holding her arm, the next he was on the floor clutching his hand and making small, pained sounds. My wrist, he gasped. I think you broke my wrist. Oops, Damien said without an ounce of sympathy. How clumsy of me. Damien. Scarlet grabbed his arm, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles like a spring about to snap. Bathroom. Now. I'm fine, he said through gritted teeth, but she could see his hands shaking. No, you're not. Bathroom. Move. She practically dragged him away from the scene, leaving Jake groaning on the restaurant floor while shocked diners looked on. The bathroom was thankfully empty, and Scarlet shoved Damien inside and locked the door behind them. What the hell was that? She demanded. He was touching you, Damien said, and his voice sounded different. Rougher. He was hurting you. So you broke his wrist? I barely touched him. Scarlet stared at him. There was something wrong with his eyes. They seemed to be shifting color, cycling between their normal storm gray and something much more golden. Damien, are you okay? I'm fine, he said, but even as he spoke, she could see his hands starting to change. His fingernails were growing longer, sharper, and there was dark hair sprouting along his knuckles. Oh my God, she breathed. You're actually doing it. You're actually changing. I'm not. Damien caught sight of his hands and swore viciously. No. Not now. Can you stop it? I'm trying. He gripped the edge of the marble sink so hard that Scarlet heard something crack. But he touched you. He hurt you. And he's not going to stop. Damien. He's going to keep coming after you, Damien continued, his voice getting rougher with every word. He's going to keep touching you, keep threatening you, keep. He cut himself off with a sound that was definitely not human. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from deep in his chest. Okay, Scarlet said carefully, maybe you should sit down. Can't, Damien gasped. If I stop fighting it. The sound of ripping fabric cut him off as his shoulders suddenly broadened, straining the expensive suit past its limits. His face was changing too, his jaw extending, his teeth getting longer and sharper. Damien, you need to calm down. Can't calm down, he snarled, and his voice was barely recognizable now. He's out there. Waiting. Planning. He wants to take you away from me. Nobody's taking me anywhere, Scarlet said firmly. But you need to get control of yourself before. A sound from outside the bathroom cut her off, Jake's voice loud and angry. Where is she? Where's my girlfriend? Damien's head snapped up, and the sound he made was pure animal rage. She's not your girlfriend, he roared, and this time his voice was completely inhuman. The bathroom mirror shattered under the force of his fury. Then the marble countertop cracked. Then the toilet seat simply exploded into pieces. Damien, Scarlet said, backing toward the door, you need to stop. But he was beyond hearing her now. The transformation was happening faster, his clothes hanging in tatters as his body changed shape. His face was elongating into something that was half human, half wolf, and completely terrifying. She's mine, he howled and put his fist through the wall. The sound of destruction was so loud that Scarlet was sure the entire restaurant could hear it. She grabbed the door handle, then hesitated. She could run. She should run. This was clearly way beyond anything she could handle. But the sound he was making now wasn't rage, it was pain. Like he was fighting against something he couldn't control, and losing. "Damien," she called through the door. "I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere." The destruction stopped abruptly. You're still there?" His voice was still rough, still not quite human, but some of the wildness had faded. "I'm still here," she confirmed. "But you're scaring the hell out of everyone else." She could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. "The police are coming," she said. "You need to change back. Now." "I'm trying," came his muffled reply. "But he's still out there. I can hear him. Smell him. He's not leaving. Then we'll deal with Jake together. But first you need to change back before the cops get here." More sounds of destruction from inside the bathroom, but quieter now, more controlled. Like he was fighting to regain human form instead of giving in to the beast. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the door unlocked. Damien stumbled out, looking like he'd been through a blender. His suit was in tatters, there were scratches all over his hands and face, and his hair looked like he'd stuck his finger in an electrical socket. But he was human again. More or less. "The bathroom," Scarlett said, looking past him at the destruction inside. "Looks like a bomb went off." "I'll pay for it," he said weakly. "That's not the point." She grabbed his arm, steadying him as he swayed on his feet. "The point is that you just turned into a werewolf in a public bathroom because my psychotic ex-boyfriend grabbed my wrist. I didn't mean to. And the other point," she continued, her voice rising, "is that you lied to me." Damien blinked at her. "What? I asked you," Scarlett said, poking him in the chest with one finger, point blank, "if you were dangerous. If you were some kind of psychopath or serial killer. And you said no. I'm not a serial killer. You're literally a predator," she shouted, not caring who heard her. "When I asked if you were dangerous, I meant, are you going to murder me? Not, are you going to turn into a giant wolf and eat people?" "I don't eat people," Damien protested weakly. "That's not the point. Then what is the point?" Scarlett stared at him. This impossible, ridiculous man who'd just destroyed a bathroom because another man had touched her wrist. His eyes were still faintly golden around the edges, and there were still traces of dark hair on his knuckles that hadn't quite faded back to normal. "The point," she said finally, "is that you should have told me. Would you have believed me? I don't know. But I deserved the choice." Damien looked like she'd slapped him. "You're right. I'm sorry." The sirens were getting closer now, and Scarlett could hear commotion from the restaurant. People shouting, chairs scraping, the general chaos that followed any kind of public disturbance. "We need to get out of here," she said. "What about Jake? What about him? He's not going to give up. You said so yourself, he's not stable." Scarlett looked back toward the restaurant, where she could still hear Jake's voice ranting about his injured wrist and demanding to know where she'd gone. "No," she admitted, "he's not." "Then what do we do?" She looked at Damien, really looked at him. His clothes were destroyed, his hair was a mess, and he still looked like he was barely holding on to his human form. But he was asking her what to do. Not telling her, not demanding, not making decisions for her. Just asking. "We figure it out," she said finally. "Together." Something that might have been relief flickered in his golden gray eyes. "Together? Don't get ahead of yourself, wolf boy," she warned, but she was almost smiling. "I'm still furious with you." "I can work with furious," Damien said, and for the first time since she'd met him, his smile looked entirely human. "Good," Scarlett said, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the service exit. "Because we're about to have a very long conversation about honesty, boundaries, and why turning into a monster every time someone touches me is not an acceptable relationship dynamic." "Relationship?" Damien's voice was hopeful. "Don't push it." But as they slipped out the back door and into the New York night, Scarlett had to admit that she wasn't running away from him anymore. Even if she probably should be. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to be the first to get notified when the part 2 of this story drops.